Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Marvin Gaye of shitting on women's MMA, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you on the 1st of August, and it's the 6-year anniversary of having a podcast. We were originally the Fights Gone By podcast. We're now the Jack Slack podcast. But it's been 6 long years. Or actually, no, it's kind of flown by. So yeah, thank you if you're someone who was listening from the beginning. Thank you if you're someone who's turned up halfway through. And if you're only coming today, I don't trust you yet. But we had a UFC event over the weekend. I was at a wedding, so I've just caught up on it. And yeah, it wasn't too bad. UFC 277. We'll do the main event first. And before we shit all over women's MMA and the techniques on it, in it rather, I do want to give mad respect to Juliana Pena for taking a beating and still biting down on her mouthpiece and going forwards. But that was something that I always admired about her because, not always, but since that first fight, definitely admired about her because it wasn't a case of, it was a case of Amanda Nunes being easily stumped by a technique that really shouldn't have stumped her and making no adjustments. It was also the fact that, the dipping jab alone wasn't scoring the finish for her. The dipping jab alone wasn't hurting Nunes. Occasionally it was, but it was getting in after it and swinging with her when she was stuck in place. And going toe-to-toe with the only woman in that division who really actually has any power, has really quite impressive power in her punches, is really impressive. She took a lot of Nunes' best shots and she basically just stayed in there and tired her out with accumulation of blows and not giving her any breaks. But in this fight, she didn't manage to tire Nunes out. She didn't even manage to land many strikes of her own. She just took a one-way beating for 25 minutes, and she was still trying to actually get into trades with Nunes and make an ugly fight of it. So, mad respect to her. She says a lot of daft things. She hasn't always been a very interesting fighter. She has horrible boxing technique. But yeah, she was game as hell in this one. And I think that she just, she's not equipped with the skills to be a really... she's equipped to be with the skills to be a great fighter in this division, but she's not equipped to be a great fighter technically. I don't think she's going to learn. I don't think she's ever going to fix her right hand coming out at her right elbow coming out at 90 degrees from her body before she throws every right hand. I don't think she's ever going to tighten up that boxing and fix it. But she more than made lemonade with the lemons that she's got. It kind of links us into the theme for this fight, which was... why add anything new? Well, actually, no. Amanda Nunes did add something new. She added fighting from Southpaw. It was a really interesting decision, and I had a good laugh at the fact that she learned to fight from a different stance with all new techniques rather than just learning to deal with a dipping jab. If you haven't watched the Filthy Casuals guide to the previous fight, the dipping jab was giving her all kinds of trouble. We talked about a few ways to deal with it. There's a lot of ways to deal with it. A lot of direct counters to it, such as timing good uppercuts, catching behind the head and scoring uppercuts, or right hands across the top as they stand up. You can use left high kicks. You can use hook kicks. Extreme example, hook kicks, but it was a nice use of that Chris Curtis clip where he hook kicked a guy for dipping jabbing. But the main thing to do with the dipping jab is just to feint. Show some feints. Move side to side. Turn the opponent. Make it so that it's harder for them to just easily go now, because you're basically becoming a Bamani game, one of those dancing games where they can see the arrow coming and they just have to press dipping jab at the right time if you're just going in over and over again, which is what Nunes did in that first fight. And that's the crazy thing about the dipping jab. Once you've caught someone a couple of times coming in with it, they think that, especially if they're a quote unquote better striker than you, they think that they can just go through it. And they make it worse for themselves by trying to just keep stepping in and trying to outswing you. So she switched to Southpaw. Now, I am going to criticize that in terms of you should just learn to deal with the dipping jab as an orthodox fighter, because surely someone else is now going to try and get in your face and do that to you. But equally, whenever we're talking about weapons that are really giving a fighter trouble, or certainly in trends in MMA, it was with the calf kick, the oblique kick, all sorts of things have come up like that. And people have said, what can you do about that? And I say, if you're in the fight already and you're trying to adapt to it, and you haven't trained for it specifically, you're going to have real trouble. But if you're capable at fighting off your opposite stance, you can take away a lot of what the opponent is doing. Because a jab is a jab when you're fighting orthodox or southpaw, but it's still different. And the whole dynamic of the stance matchup changes, or the whole dynamic of the exchanges and everything changes. The calf kick is a great example. If you are having trouble with the calf kick, it is almost always, with the exception of maybe Arnold Allen, it's almost always going to be from being in a matched stance, a closed stance, a matched stance with the opponent, where you're left foot forward and their left foot forward, because they can hammer their right leg into the back of your left leg. If you switch, so you're southpaw and they're orthodox, they have to step up and kick with their lead leg to hammer in the calf kicks, which, one is a different leg, probably less conditioned to them kicking the calf and the shin bone with, but two involves a step up, so it's slower. It's just a different technique. There is no way that they can do the rear leg round kick into the back of your calf if you switch stances. They have to either switch stances and do it with the other leg, or they have to do a step up and do it with their lead leg. That technique no longer exists when you switch stance. And the dipping jab is the same. If you are throwing a dipping jab, one of the great things about the dipping jab, and the reason that it was so effective for Pena to follow up off, is that you are able to step in with the opponent at the same time, land a good counter while they're stepping in, and then it's very hard for them to get out of the way before you start throwing your right hand again, if they're really a sucker for it. So you watched the first fight, and there were a lot of splitting or dipping the jab, scoring her own jab, Pena this is, and then following with the right hand and like a slappy left hook and another right hand. It was how she was able to keep getting in. And of course, if you start an exchange with your head getting snapped back and your something filling your vision, it's very hard to continue winning that exchange. Especially if the opponent's moving their head just a little bit, like Pena was doing. But if you go southpaw versus an orthodox fighter who just wants to do the dipping jab every time you step in, all they're doing is dipping down towards your left high kick, left knee. And first thing that Amanda Nunes did in the first round, and then in every subsequent round, was to throw a left high kick at Pena's arm. Because that, in itself, is enough to make you rethink dipping down to that side. The example we always use is Ross Pearson. Great head movement, great slips into counter left hooks. Would stop doing it if you showed him a couple of left high kicks, or even body kicks that could have turned into high kicks if he ducked down at that time, or a couple of left knees. Or a couple of uppercuts, which we're going to talk about now, because Nunes did a great job of, she did that lean out the window uppercut, the one that southpaws love to lead with, where you slip your head outside the lead shoulder and then you come in with the lead hand uppercut. And you can line up your left straight off that. You can do sort of a corkscrew uppercut like Naz used to do and use it as a power blow. But she was doing it, she was sort of fainting or faking in and expecting Pena to try and dipping jab and then trying to uppercut her with the right hand as she was dipping. So show that a couple of times and that's also going to stand someone up. And the dipping jab just isn't as useful, southpaw versus orthodox or orthodox versus southpaw. Another thing that really made this striking matchup interesting was that the dipping jab allows her to plant her, to just jam her left foot in and get into range. If you're dealing southpaw versus orthodox, the lead legs, lead knee, lead foot often act as a barrier. So throughout this fight, you saw Pena throwing her right hand as a lead, because she knew to do that against southpaws, but like running through afterwards and squaring her stance and getting clipped with that counter right hook all the time, because she was sort of struggling to get over that lead leg. The lead leg was sort of always in the middle of her stance and she couldn't close the distance close enough, whereas that was never an issue in the orthodox versus orthodox matchup. There was a great fight between, well, it wasn't a great fight, I think it was Golota and whoever he fought that was a southpaw, where they just kept tripping over each other's lead legs in a boxing match, this is. But that was the sort of thing that was happening here. She just didn't feel at all comfortable closing the distance against a southpaw. And Nunes was doing a great job of keeping the distance as a southpaw. So Pena was standing more upright when she jabbed, and after every jab or over the top of every jab, Nunes was able to catch her with the counter right hook, which was fantastic. It was doubly helped by the fact that Pena was trying to get stuck in. And basically the way that Amanda Nunes fought was, even though she was the big hitter, she's the one with the big ovaries. She's the big hitter. She fought in a way to stop Pena getting into longer exchanges and just that rock'em sock'em wine mums, I called it the other day. But Nunes was staying out of those exchanges and trying to land cleaner shots. And Pena was trying to run into those exchanges and make them happen and really exposing herself in the process. I thought it was very interesting that because Amanda Nunes is obviously a natural orthodox fighter, she kept going back to orthodox after a weird exchange or after she pivoted off or after they'd come out of a clinch, and then she would immediately have to remember to go back to southpaw. She wanted nothing, she wanted none of that smoke from orthodox. But then, Pena didn't train at all for southpaw because why would she? Amanda Nunes isn't a southpaw and has never been a southpaw. The few moments when Nunes did go back to orthodox, she threw like the calf kick, and Pena checked it no problems. And that was something very impressive in the first fight. Never an issue for her. Amanda Nunes had been getting very one note off her orthodox stance. She actually showed more variety in her boxing and kickboxing from southpaw, which she's just started doing, than she had in years from her orthodox stance, I felt. The Nunes gas tank was still interesting because she ended up doing the last 2 rounds, basically, getting top position and sitting on her. But she did a better job of keeping her hands in. She was very at risk of she got sort of tied up in the Kimura in the first fight. We talked about it a lot on the Boycast, but the Kimura really stopped her from landing punches after she dropped Pena with a punch very early in the first round, and Pena used the Kimura grip and the threat of the sweep to really tie her up. And even the Kimura grip from when Nunes tried to take her back, it stopped her from throwing basically any more strikes. But even in this one, she was on the bottom of side control in the 5th round, and she bridged into her, grabbed the Kimura, worked back to half guard, and then I think Nunes stepped back into the half guard, but Pena started using a butterfly hook to elevate her off the half guard leg and start turning into the turtle with the Kimura to try and get up or to turn back in and use the Kimura, Sakuraba style, which we always love. Really lovely ground and pound from Nunes in the 3rd and 4th round, though, and a massive cut opened on the top of Pena's head. There was a lot of the 5th round where Pena was trying to turn in from side control, and Nunes was using the half Nelson, so under the arm and behind the head, to try and turn her back flat to the mat. And she was she was trying to get her knee over the arm for the crucifix and so on. But that position, Shogun murdered people from with knees, because obviously the opponent's looking right into the knee, and you are with the half Nelson pulling their elbow away from them and making it impossible for them to obstruct the path of the knee with their hand. And I was thinking about that the other day because someone asked me about knees to the head on the ground. And I said Habib would have loved them, because Shogun used to use the mounted crucifix a lot from side control, and he used to he'd sit in sort of a scarf hold, and he'd arc his knee in over the top, and then as he hit them with the knee, or the knee was blocked, he'd just drag it down to the ground with the arm trapped underneath it and go into the crucifix. Habib would have loved that. But actually read the Shogun Advanced Striking 2.0 if you're a boy, because I believe I cover that. And the Shogun Advanced Striking was a lot about ground and pound, because he's sort of remembered as a striker, but he was probably more effective as a ground and pounder. So yeah, Nunes regains her title. She didn't look perfect by any means. She just looked like she had a good idea. I mean, it was a really good game plan. I thought that was a great game plan. It did sort of sidestep the issue that she had the first time, which could still be an issue. I mean, I'm saying if they had a third match, Pena switches to southpaw and dipping jabs her every time she steps in. You just keep matching stances with her and dipping jab every time she tries to come in. I actually would be surprised if she's learned to deal with the dipping jab as a southpaw, if she can't deal with it, against another southpaw, if she can't deal with it as an orthodox fighter when that's her base. Valentina Shevchenko and her stands are looking at that and going, yeah, well, Valentina can probably still land good blows on her. But Valentina was never going to get in Nunes' face. Very few people have tried. Raquel Pennington didn't want any of it. Jermaine Durandamy did a decent job drawing her out and countering, but again, Jermaine Durandamy will fall over if you... Well, actually, it's not fair to take the piss out of Jermaine Durandamy's takedown defense when Juliana Pena had so much trouble with her. She's the one submission on Jermaine Durandamy's record is Juliana Pena. Also got submitted by Valentina. I mean, she was kind of massively overrated as a grappler and a fighter, I felt, before the first fight, but then she, like I said, won my respect by just getting in Nunes' face and tiring her out. even if it meant taking blows. There are a couple that she dinged Nunes in this one, and they actually looked like she hurt her a bit. But she, it's so clear that Nunes has real, damn, that's power, whereas Pena is just game. And, if she hits you at the wrong time in an exchange where, you get hit by her at the wrong time, you're going to feel it. But, I mean, even that is still better than what a lot of women's MMA striking is. So the belt's back on Amanda. DC made a massive deal about her being double champion 2 times now, which just means losing one belt and re-winning. It just, yeah. I think at this point we should all be aware that double champ is nonsense. Rogan even said, but who is there at 145? And Daniel Cormier goes, well, she's defended the belt 3 times. Just fucking terrible. Actually, on the subject of Daniel Cormier, let's take a little break to chat about how he fell for a very obvious fake that I put was fake on the fucking picture so he could see it. Basically, after events, the move by various Twitter accounts of apps that are unrelated to news, they just tweet this to get engagement, but they will tweet fake payouts on a picture with 6 fighters on, and then big yellow letters, the number that they supposedly got paid out, but they didn't. That's the point. They're never right because the payouts aren't released. So it's just making up shit so that you get people going, oh, I can't believe so-and-so was paid this, that, and the other. And I made a fake one, and it's the top 4 were like made up payouts, and the bottom 2 panels were the UFC doesn't release payouts. These infographics are always bollocks, or bullshit, or whatever I said. But in the top right corner, Paddy Pimblett was being paid $700,000 for fighting on UFC London. That was the only, that's the only thing on the internet that says Paddy Pimblett was paid $700,000, and it says very clearly, if you read past the first fucking line, that it's fake. And DC on his god awful podcast, whatever it's called, that's on ESPN. Said, I saw somewhere that Paddy had been paid $700,000. He said that might be true, that might not be true, and then he continued talking as if it was true. No one did an ounce of checking, just the state of MMA media generally, and Daniel Cormier. And I've been planting stupid things for him to say in his head all week, and he did loads at UFC 277. That was all me. But anyway, moving on. What was good on this card? Brandon Moreno versus Kai Kara-France was banging. Very weird looks from Brandon Moreno. He's changed. He's training with James Krause now, so he might cheat on his wife. But he'd shortened up his stance, but he's always got like this open hands doing wax on, wax off stuff. And I don't know if I'd seen him do it before, but I don't know if I've ever seen it this pronounced. But yeah, when Kai Kara-France attacked his lead leg, he got it out of the way a lot of the time. He was really good at just doing that little withdraw, which we're always talking about. We've been talking about for ages. After the calf kick became a huge thing, after the oblique kick became a huge thing, we said, if you can retract your leg, that's the easiest way to deal with it. You don't have to check a kick, you just let it fly past. And ideally, they throw it really hard, and you just step back in on them when they're out of position. And Moreno did a good job of that. I thought Krause had a really good read on him because he said between rounds, he said he just wants to chop your lead leg and try and time over your jab with his right hand. And that's basically most of what he did. He wasn't looking to jab in. He wasn't trying to throw those 3-part combinations he was using against Askarov, the 1-2 step through left hand. But he did some great work just doing those things. Krause was calling for Moreno to end his combinations with a left hook sometimes and a left kick sometimes. So you saw a couple of nice left body kicks coming off combinations. Actually, we're going to get into that with Blood Diamond later, I just enjoyed that a surprising amount. But man, this fight was just terrific. I thought it was 4 rounds. It only went 3, but it felt like a full 4 rounds of action. They took lumps out of each other. Moreno looked to grapple. Kai Kara-France's counter-grappling still looks good. Or anti-grappling, whatever you want to call it. I mean, if you're engaging in the grappling, it's not really anti-grappling. But the finish was incredible because Moreno looked to be in trouble. He was bleeding from above his eye. Moreno was all fucked up. He was cut and he'd been struggling in the 3rd round. And then he comes out of a clinch with a spinning back fist, which set Kara-France into retreat. Because if you get clipped with something like that, especially coming out of a clinch, ask Kyoji Horiguchi. but it can take a moment to reset. So he starts backing up, and Moreno runs him down and hits him with a left kick to the liver that just turns him off. He just goes to the ball, goes into a ball, and his hands drop, and he's going to the mat, and he manages to cover his head. But the crazy thing about any good liver shot or any good body shot, and there were a couple on this card, is that even in a fist fight against a really dangerous opponent who can give you lasting brain damage, all you really want to do is cuddle your own rib cage. It's that human instinct, to try and put things back together if they're broken. But incredible kick. Looked like it hurt a ton. I thought both looked good. I thought Moreno actually looked a lot flappier in the boxing maybe I'm not. I think he looked a little bit flappy in the third Davison Figueiredo fight, but I'm hoping to recapture the beautiful boxing I saw in that second Figueiredo fight. But Figueiredo was there. He had his own belt, which they let him take in. So they were trying to build they want to do a champion versus champion thing. But they were very cool about it. I mean, he had a massive lump on his head. Actually, Kai Kara-France, from the stare, not the stare down, but when he's looking at the camera while they're announcing his name, his nose was red as fuck. He's been taking his sparring seriously for this one. Just a bit sad that Kai Kara-France's incredible little streak has to end against Moreno for an interim title. He should have been fighting for a real title. But I can't even remember what's going on with Figgy. Isn't it that he is negotiating with the UFC or something like that? I remember this interim title being suspect when they announced it, but they generally are now. There's been very few occasions where they are legitimate. But speaking of suspect interim titles, Derek Lewis fought for one of those recently, and he fought Sergey Pavlovich on this card. Pavlovich, he's been around for a while in the UFC, but the only good opponent he's fought is Overeem, and he got smashed in that fight. But that was sort of like, he was coming up as, was he former M1 champion or something like that? Or Fight Nights Global. And that was sort of his prospect loss. You have to lose to a 46-year-old man if you're a heavyweight coming up, for reasons that don't make any sense if you look at it on paper. But he beat Marcelo Golm, Maurice Green, and Shamil Abdurakhimov, who are all pretty bum-tier heavyweights, even as heavyweights go. Derek Lewis, while pretty much a bum, does have things that bring people big problems, and it really saddens me every time he gets a win. But yeah, this was just his take on the anti-Derek Lewis strategy. You back him onto the fence, popped him with a couple of punches, moved back as Derek Lewis swung at him, and then he hit him with a short right hand and then followed up with some more punches. Derek Lewis fell onto his face, which is never good, but then quickly jumped up again as the ref was stopping it. Not an ideal stoppage, but if people face plant, typically you want to stop the fight because face planting, people falling on their heads is a really dangerous thing generally. That's how a lot of deaths in martial arts happen or in fighting happen. BKFC, when they killed that lad, Justin Thornton, he got hit with a punch sort of wading in with his face first, and then it spiked his head on the mat as he fell. I mean, there's plenty of examples of that not killing people. Rogerio Bonturin against Kai Kara-France got spiked on the mat by falling forward, but they're pretty bad. Anytime someone's head bounces off the mat, I'm inclined to want to stop the fight. I was thinking of Ricky Hatton versus Manny Pacquiao. That's a really bad one. Back of his head bounces off the mat. And while I was thinking of that, I remembered that there was a great clip of someone's granddad doing a slip and slide with his grandkids, and he just slides and falls on the back of his head, like clearly unconscious, and he just slides unconsciously into his grandchildren who don't give a shit about him. They're busy playing with like toys at the end of the slip and slide. Grim, but very, very funny. But yeah, this stoppage, not ideal. I think it's just nice that anything that moves Derek Lewis away from title contention is nice. Sergey Pavlovich has some interesting aspects to his game. Still not really seen him decisively beat anyone good, but yeah, it's heavyweight. What can you ask for? Actually, one of the heavyweight fights on this card was actually one of my favourite fights on the card. Hamdi Abdelwaheb versus Dontel Mays. Hamdi, I believe, or Abdelwaheb was a late replacement. I didn't know he was a fucking Olympian in wrestling. But he had 3 fights under his belt. They listed him as 5-0, but he definitely isn't. And Dontel Mays has been on a little comeback run lately. He's always been a guy who looks like he can do some clever stuff, but loses to better talents. Most recently he humped some guy in the head with his cup from north to south. But he always has some interesting striking. He can kick decently for a big heavyweight guy. And he came out spazzing out, throwing jumping kicks and stuff like that. And Abdelwaheb, despite being the wrestler, cracked him with a good right hand in the first round and kept him in the turtle for most of it along the fence. Second round, Abdelwaheb starts wrestling, and his wrestling looked banging. He did what the standard... We're talking about James Krause and stuff like that. There's this idea of recycling along the fence, which he's very big on. And we talked about it the other day with David Onama versus whoever it was he beat. But he was doing an outside trip from the body lock along the fence, and to balance themselves and to stop them just being pushed over by the chest on that outside trip, fighters will free a hand and turn their back. And then you've got the back. But then in turn, when they turn back into you, you can drop on the double leg and restart the cycle all over again, or just pick them up with the double leg if they're out of position. So it's like double leg, come up on the body lock, attempt the outside trip, they turn their back, you have their back, you can try and mat return them, or they could turn back into you, you drop on the hips again, you're back on the double, come up on the body lock. It's this constant recycling of things. And what Abdelwaheb did in this fight was he got the body lock along the fence, he stepped around and started doing the outside trip. Mays gave his back so that Abdelwaheb had the back body lock, and instead of trying like a mat return or a lift, in the prelims, Orion Koske, whatever his name is, almost gave himself a concussion suplexing Blood Diamond. He spent a ton of energy lifting him up out of a bent over stance and slammed his own head into the back of the back of his own head into the mat while Blood Diamond was sort of sitting on his face. But this one, he has the back body lock, and rather than try a mat return, he steps around him, back round in front of him, and does the same outside trip that he'd been threatening to get the back position. And he did it twice in this fight. It was amazing. Really cool. DC, rightly lost his mind over it. And he did all this with one eye closed, basically, because Mays punched him right in the eyeball. And it was a southpaw left straight too. It wasn't even a jab or anything like that. It was just caught him flush on the eyeball. He spent the next 30 seconds trying to wink it out, and then his eye completely closed. So he did amazing. I was really impressed by him. They were talking about it on commentary, but being a good wrestler can translate quite well to being a good striker, because so much of wrestling, wrestling in MMA is very different, because you don't have to get past a guy being stooped over with his hands down, ready to down block you. Wrestling is about setups and tricking people, and if you're good at that and you apply that to striking, you can be pretty crafty without necessarily having amazing mechanics that you've honed for years. Drew Dober versus Rafael Alves was an extremely cool fight. I think we said this one was probably... I think I said this was probably my favourite matchup on the card. I think I definitely said that if it isn't great, it'll be weird, but it turned out to be great and sort of weird. Rafael Alves is the most black explosive man I've ever seen. He started the fight by dipping to his right and then dipping to his left and throwing a hand to the floor, either cartwheel kick or just hand to the floor round kick. But it was extremely cool looking. Reminded me of the heyday of Marcus Aurelio, the capoeirista in MMA. And really, really scary because he did it quick, and Drew Dober thought it looked quick. So, Drew Dober very quickly put in a left high kick to try and stand him up and not let him dip off to his right side before throwing a leaping weird shit again. But, the fight was Dober trying to push this man back to the fence and tire him out with a pace, while also trying to navigate the fact that Rafael Alves was throwing hard punches back all the time. He's very explosive. If he chins you and gets you out of position, he'll guillotine you. Finished Mark Giacchese with a guillotine quite recently. But in fact, in the very first exchange of this fight, aside from that weird cartwheel kick, Alves managed to flow from a couple of punches into a clinch. He did a little knee bump of the inside of Dober's thigh and snapped him down and threatened the guillotine, and Dober had to sit back with his back to the mat and almost give up mount, basically, to try and defend it. But Alves, he's a weird one. I've likened him to Yoel Romero, and And certainly you saw that in this fight where he was backing himself onto the fence and sort of breathing hard, but Dober wasn't willing to step in as hard as he often would because Rafael Alves could still jump up with a flying knee or just crack him with a left hook coming in. A real threatening dude. And there are some great shots of Dober just getting cracked as he steps in along the fence and no-selling it because he's Drew Dober and his chin is firstly G.I. Joe-like, but also made out of granite. There was a great moment as Alves was getting tired towards the end of the second because Dober was sort of 1-2ing him and 1-2-1ing him, and he was not really committing as much as he could and probably does against other opponents. If you've seen him walking people down before, he'll do that wide left hand into the body. He'll pull back and try and fire across the top of their right hand. And I think that's part of it too. Alves wasn't coming off the fence with like a nice right straight. He doesn't really throw straight punches. He just sort of swings. And there was a moment near the end of round 2 where I think Alves took a kick to the groin and he got time to recover. And the moment that he gets back into the fight, he just goes mental. It was third round, Yoel Romero just came out of nowhere. Obviously had a little breather before it, but yeah, he really looked like he was going to try and take, or was going to be able to take Drew Dober's head off. Dober weathered it, and then in the third round, he put him down with a beautiful left straight to the body. There was a lot of discussion about where it landed, solar plexus, floating rib, liver, anything between like your solar plexus and your right side is good. Someone got knocked out with a left jab to the liver, basically, the other day in one FC or one championship. Throwing your left hand to the body, you're going to catch something good, probably. The weird thing about body shots is that people fixate on the one shot knockdown because it's very visually cool. You know, Hatton had a couple of them, but they're not super popular in high-level boxing. But it makes you lose sight of the massive value of constantly pursuing the body with, you know, lesser punches or just digging into the body constantly. You're very rarely going to get that reaction out of someone because they typically have to be breathing out or breathing in, rather. Changing between breaths is another really bad time to take something. Or just not braced. But one of the great things about body shots is that by throwing them a lot, you're making the opponent brace for impact a lot. And that in itself is tiring. It's just much rarer. Or, you know, it's not rare, but it's much more unusual to catch someone in a vulnerable position with body shots. Normally you go in for them and the opponent clenches everything up and takes them and they hurt, but they're not as bad as this. But this caught him completely off guard. Goes into a ball. Dober did a good job of not just running up and punting the clearly done guy. But man, amazing performance from Dober to deal with such a tricky opponent. And you know, I saw when Damir Ismagulov fought Alves, and I think that was Alves' first fight in the UFC, but you could see he was tricky then. It was one where their records really don't reflect how good they are. You know, it's because of this division. I think Dober was like 24-10 or something like that. And I think Alves is also like 20-10. I hope they don't cut him because he's on a couple of. Oh wait, no, hang on. Is he? I think he's 1-3 now in the UFC. Oh no, he's 1-2 in the UFC, and he finished the one, and it was over Jacasey, who just won a good fight. So safe for now, but I hope he picks up a win in his next one because it would be really sad to see him go. And for Dober, second in a new winning streak. He was on a great one from Polo Reyes to Alex Hernandez, got toppled by Makachev, and then Riddell had a great fight against him. So what else was good? Oh, I want to talk about Blood Diamond versus Orion Kosuke, because I thought, yeah, Blood Diamond, I feel like I'm going to enjoy watching this guy fight, but people are never going to respect him anymore. The post-fight threads on this guy were brutal. But, you know, he's been hyped up a lot by his teammates at City Kickboxing. A lot of people say, you know, not ready for the UFC. Very hard to come in at 3-0 and fight guys who have earned their way there. He definitely has some assistance from his connections, kind of like the Diaz's, always getting their teammates on cards, but their teammates aren't actually very good. But Blood Diamond, you know, you hear a lot of good stuff about him from the gym, and watching this fight, I can totally see how he'd be very difficult for someone who's already a good striker. Carries his hands very low, pointing at the opponent, which is something that Sugar Ray Robinson talked about in his autobiography. He was taught it by some guy called Soldier something or other. Soldier Tom? I forget. But he was just an old guy hanging around in the gyms of Detroit. And he said, "Go." You know, he had him shadowbox in front of a mirror. He said, you always want to be able to see down your cannons. If you've got your fists pointing at the opponent, when you throw your punches at them, they're going straight, and basically your tell is the fist getting bigger and the shoulders turning and whatever. But if you have your hands really upright, goalpost style, in what is common in kickboxing and therefore common in MMA, you're going from showing the bottom of your fist to your hand changing so that you're showing the front of your fist. So the tell is much more obvious and the movement's a lot slower. So it was interesting seeing him do that. He's obviously comfortable enough that he's not getting dinged with easy punches from that position. And he's got some weird looks that you can tell annoy high-level strikers, like probably Israel Adesanya and Kai Kara-France and whoever else he's training with there. The finishing combinations with the left hook, leaning out of the combination and throwing the left leg as you fall backwards. Very awkward technique, very ugly technique, but you saw how it works. Catching guys over the back of the head with that high kick, just coming over the shoulder. So sneaky. Ilias Enahachi is a great one for that. Or Alazov, who's a very well-ranked kickboxer nowadays. Alazov. Fuck, I can't remember his name. I just saw him in Beyond Kickboxing's pound-for-pound rankings too. But they'll do that. They'll throw high kicks with their lead side just so it comes over the opponent's shoulder and catches them over the back of the head. And if you do it after a left hook, your body's turning and you're falling away. Very crafty. He did it a number of times in this fight. There was a beautiful counter-up elbow he hit on the way in. When he had his man hurt, he threw a front kick and stepped in with an elbow too. That was great, but then immediately went into the clinch. And in the clinch and on the mat, he was clearly not on the level that you need to be fighting people who are even decent all-rounders in the UFC at the low level. So that was what I got from this. I got that I would enjoy watching him fight. It's going to suck every time he hits the mat because he'll probably lose and be there for the rest of the round. But you can definitely look at his striking and see some things that will probably piss people off in the gym. And in a good way, not in like a dangerous way, just in a, man, that's crafty. There was a beautiful one where he pulled back from a kick or something, and he switched stances like Israel will do. He pulls and then he steps back, and he went off his back foot, ball of the foot, pushed in, and threw a left straight, or a straight from the other stance than he started in. Very, very cool. But Ryan Kasky did his job. It's like Robert Whittaker versus Uriah Hall. Uriah Hall lost that fight by 2 spinning kicks because he threw the spinning kick and Robert Whittaker just stepped in and grabbed him around the waist with a body lock from behind and then didn't relinquish that position for the whole of the round. He did it twice for 2 rounds, just won by that. It's not your job to win in a we've agreed to swing at range or whatever fight. It's your job to take easy wins if the guy's going to give you easy wins. So let's round off what was good on this card. Michael Morales, God, he looked awkward. He looked awkward against Trevin Giles, but he looked awkward here. Adam Fuggett was actually giving a really hard time, but he's got a good 1-2, and if you can land that, and you're long and you're powerful, you will land that at some point in the fight. And if it's so powerful that you can just mop up with it, then that's what will happen. But he was doing all kinds of showboating and stuff, and just not looking impressive for the most part. Draco Close got a workman-like decision over Rafa Garcia. It was decent. Lots of cage wrestling, lots of the meta that we're familiar with now. And then he called for Tony Ferguson, which, provided we don't use that to leapfrog him into the top 10, I'm all for. I think that's a good step down for Tony Ferguson. Alex Moreno and Matt Simmelsberger had a decent little scrap. Moreno looked good in this one. He's another guy like Brian Barberena, where I think he's not good enough to be among the good guys in the division, but good enough to give fights to old guys and good enough to be not great guys who are just coming in. But Simmelsberger fought this one with basically no eye for about more than half of it, so respect to him. And the doctor came in and did sort of a really lazy checking of how many fingers am I holding up, with the cornerman right behind him talking in his ear. I very much doubt that he was passing that test, but this is what doctors do at fights. They don't want to be the bad guy stopping the fight, even though that's their job. Magomed Ankalaev versus Anthony Smith was interesting. Probably the lightest on his feet I've seen Ankalaev hit and step up calf kicks, which we talked about. Only Arnold Allen is good at them. Anthony Smith couldn't work out how to do a step-up calf kick, kept throwing inside calf kicks, hurt his ankle at some point. Don't know if it was on a calf kick or coming out of a clinch, but yeah, in the second round, he ended up sitting to guard. In fact, I think he sat to guard in the first round. And he's a good grappler, but sitting to guard, very rarely works. He did get in on the single and try and sit through onto what's called a lower leg shift sometimes, or the Lucas Leitch guard. It's a form of half guard that is sort of intrinsically linked with wrestling. So if you see Rafael Lovato or Damian Maia, when they go for a single leg, they can't complete the single leg, but they'll sit in on the half guard and then they'll come up again. He was getting close to that, but Ankalaev was having none of it. Crazy heavy base on that lad. And, the thing with the Lucas Leitch sort of guard is that you sort of have to commit your hands and you can just sit there taking elbows to the head. So he ended up reverting to like a regular guard and just getting pounded out. Pantoja versus Perez was bizarre because I'd just been talking on the Boycast about how slick I thought Pantoja had looked in his last few and how it was coming together for him. His fight with Manel Cap, his kicks were great, his framing was great, he kept himself safe against a big banger, and he just looked very slick. And we were talking about two things with him. I was saying, well, there's three guys in this division, him, Jussier Formiga, and Brandon Moreno, who are great at boxing into back takes, basically, or shooting and coming up on the back immediately. And I was saying how slick he looked on the feet. Did not look at all slick on the feet in this fight. He just ran at Perez, throwing punches and eating punches. I think he ate just as many as he threw. But in the course of doing that, he then ducked in on Perez's back, straight to the back, and started attacking the rear naked choke from standing on the back. Really impressive, because he must have decided that was the way to get an opening here. And he got his opening, and he capitalised on it perfectly. He was trying to punch hands across for chokes from the back, which you like to see, because holding the back, I will always be in favour of not scoring that as domination or whatever. But it's not a position you can strike from. So if you're punching hands through and looking for chokes, that's legit. That's legit control time and legit threatening of a finish. He was brutal with this. He's grabbing the mouth. He's doing the smother we were talking about last week. He did the Alan Goes special, which is where you where the base of your thumb meets your wrist. If you make a fist and just put that into someone's eye socket, you could lift their head up by it and try and choke underneath it. Gets the choke. Actually, I think it looked like a neck crank. He was turning his head around while they were talking about how you can strangle someone with the chin in. But yeah, he's turning his head way off to the side, which is, you saw Nunes going for that in the main event too. It's legit. Damian Maia used to get guys with that. Sakuraba got guys with that. You're not allowed to do it in ADCC even, so the fact that you can do it in MMA, very cool. Hopefully, he's in title contention now, because Alex Perez just fought for the title in his last fight. Granted, it was a year or two ago, but that's a good name to have on your record if you're a flyweight. And that's about it from that card. It was decent. Certainly not looking down the barrel of Thiago Santos' main event again. Oh my God. A lot of people were talking about DC not doing his homework like Dominic Cruz said he doesn't, after he fell for the Paddy the Baddy 700k payout. But in this card, he made two great flubs. One was when he was talking about Ihor Potieria gassing out against Negu Moreno. Oh, actually, that was a really good fight too. Negu Moreno just outlasted him. And his last combination, or like what was near the last combination, he went punch, level change, came up with a punch and grabbed the head. Love that. Grab the head for knees, that is. And it reminded me of Skarbowski. 1-2 liver shot. 1-2 duck as if to go for the liver shot, but grab the head and knee it instead. It's a great little technique. But yeah, in that fight, they were talking about Potieria getting tired. And he goes, this is like long guys. This will happen sometimes. Do you remember Johnny Walker when he used to fight in the UFC? And you're going, yeah, he still does. He headlined some shit fight night a couple of months ago. And he headlined one against Santos where they did nothing. And the other great moment was Joe Rogan and DC talking about how great Thiago Santos fights always are. And I'll allow Rogan to not know because these are on fight night cards that he's not at. But DC has commentated some of these ones where he's just in terrible main events. However, there was a good rising over the weekend, or it looked like a good rising. I'm going to find out how to steal that, and we'll talk about it on the Boycast. And there's other stuff coming up too. So if you want to get in on the extra podcasts and articles, sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast. 6 years in the making. If you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. And if you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Blood Diamond replacing Kakuno as my guilty pleasure. Wish he would learn to wrestle. Bless.